Brave men rejoice in adversity, just as brave soldiers triumph in war. Good morning, I'm Ratna Manucha, and our session today is about introducing military history in schools across India. The Indian school curriculum, as laid down by boards such as the ICSE and the CBSE and various other state boards, offer a diverse array of subjects for the students to choose from. Strangely enough, they seem to have missed out on a very important subject which is gaining widespread importance in today's day and age, that is military history. One of the chief priorities of any country is its security. Keeping this in mind, the young and upcoming generation must be brought up to date with their country's military history so as to instill in them a fervor for acting as responsible future caretakers of the nation. A key element of patriotism is encouraging people to understand their own country in the context of a world in which their own country is important and central. As a nation, we don't really have enough knowledge of the commitment and dedication of our armed forces. Our panelists today are Mr. Darshan Singh, Chairman Wellam Boys School, Dehradun, Colonel Vivek Sharma, and Mrs. Padmini Sambasivam, Principal, Wellam Girls School, Dehradun. A very warm welcome to all of you, and it's lovely to have you today with us. I'll begin with Mr. Darshan Singh, sir. You started the first ever military history conference in 2017, if I'm correct, under the aegis of Kunal Verma, military historian and filmmaker. What exactly spurred you on, sir? Would you like to give us a slight insight into what spurred you on to start this and how has it helped the boys? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ratna. I think you have touched a very important point about military history being a subject in schools, but you also asked why we should do this. And I think the answer has actually been staring in our face for the last 70 years. Everywhere in the world, if you go to the French school children, they know the history of France, the military history of France. The Germans know the German military history. Every country knows what their military men have done and how they are sovereign nations, what makes them sovereign and secure. In India, this is one area that has been sadly and badly neglected. I understand that the CBSE has a large menu of 128 subjects from which any school can choose. Obviously, some subjects you have to have, like physics, chemistry, maths, English, Hindi, but they must introduce at least this as an option, the government of India. You mentioned that we should know about our armed forces or what they do. This is an important point. But I believe that if you have to have self prestige, if your nation has to have prestige, if you as a national in India want to have self esteem, then you have to know about your armed forces and what they have done. Because if you do, and how they have fought for us, what they do, many of us are related to these people. Then we have also a thing called self esteem. So, to bring this into the children is very important. It's a confidence factor. It also brings us together in one nation. We all see a certain brotherhood, a brother and sister feeling when you see the people in military vehicles. You have a certain feeling. Now in India, I have seen at the Delhi airport there were soldiers going to uh, Ladakh, and they were going to catch an aircraft to go to Ladakh, and all the people at the airport clapped. Now, this happens in other nations, and so to some extent, India is also realizing the importance of the armed forces in our nation. But there's another aspect, and I'm the only son. My father was also in the army. And here I would like to make one correction about Colonel Vivek Sharma. He's not only an army officer, he's also a former commandant of the RIMC. So he's like one of us. He's an educationist. He knows what it means to bring up the next generation, and so it's wonderful he's with us. And my father studied in the RIMC many years ago, and I know how the military folk talk to each other in cantonments. What they are saying only they know. The civilians just a few hundred meters away in the civilian world don't know what's going on because, and this I feel is a tragedy, that we live in two worlds, that we don't know what our army brethren are doing, what they suffer, how they sacrifice. So one day in a conversation with Kunal, I felt as a son of an army officer that it was important that we spread this message among school children. Maybe some of them will join the armed forces, but in any case, they will have an awareness of what happens in the armed forces, what happened in the. See, many people know the 62 war or the Kargil war, but if you talk to even an educated person in India and say, what happened in the 65 war, they don't know what you're talking about. And I think that is a tremendous tragedy. I think for us not to know our own history, it's one thing to know about our armed forces, but it's another thing to know our own history. It's unpardonable if you don't know your own history. We can't only know about the civic disturbances in this country, we also have to know what's happening at the border, what our officers and men are doing, and how well our officers and men have done, how they have succeeded sometimes with not much equipment, but with their good training, with their good strategy, with their good planning, how we have turned the tables on the other side, and how we have, in a way, won each interaction, won each war, except for one time, which was the goof up of 1962. But even the 1962 war we have to know about, because it's only when you know about it that you know how you can avoid it. And I'm happy to say that as an Indian citizen, that what has happened now in Galwan and Ladakh is a clear indication that our nation at the political, diplomatic, but certainly at the military level has learnt lessons from 62. And as we won in 70, 65, 71, Kargil, it's not going to go bad this time in Ladakh. And this comes from awareness, knowledge, and understanding what happened. So we brought this about. We tried to spread it to other schools. We brought it an awareness in our own school. I want to thank RIMC. I want to thank also Welham Girls, and in particular Hopetown Girls School also, who really strongly joined us. Apart from many other schools that came from all over India, we spread the message, and we hope those schools will spread the message further. And I also once again hope that it becomes a mandatory subject from CBSE in schools. That's it. So over to you, Ratna.
Thank you, sir. That was really insightful. And that little snippet about the RIMC, well, that was really news to me. I didn't know that. And it's absolutely fabulous to know that your father was from RIMC. That's great, sir. Uh, Vivek, I want to come to you next. The true soldier fights not because he hates what is in front of him, but because he loves what is behind him. How do you think military history can incorporate these values in the youth of today?
Ma'am, I think Mr. Darshan has aptly summarized all that in his military history seminar. So I want to tell something which is this. This is a vow, rally of words. But I want to start with another vow, what he has done and how we have been associated together. And even Mrs. Padmini, she's been part of what we have done. And it is actually these measures. We in the military, we are very fond of we are very regimental in our approach. We love our history, we love our regiments, and that is what binds us together. So your question is how do we get the young minds to be caught up into the same kind of ethos? And that's exactly what he has done. I can tell you, it was a delightful sight to see while when he mentioned whether it was the Hope Towns, Vellum Girls, Vellum Boys, and RMC, not just marching together, but merging together for a cause. And it was evident together with all the other schools that you mentioned who were there with us. Now, military history is one binding factor that I feel, and that is where we need to go further, and we need to find a cause for ourselves. There is a cause, and military history is not something to learn only about the military. It is to learn about everything to do with the nation, because whether it is the geopolitics, in fact, all forms of sciences, social sciences, general sciences, everything, it merges into military history. So it is very essential, and that's where I would say that. The measures that Mr. Darshan has taken, we only have to take two, and I'm sure CBSE can sort out all those 128 plus subjects.
Subjects. Padmini, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult to start off after Mr. Darshan Singh, kind of lays the platform for people. It almost summarize everybody else's words. So, but I think, like he rightly said, if at all we have to have a binding sense, it is very, very important to learn one's history, and especially military history. Um, Also because I think it's been hugely neglected in our books. We've almost stopped with Mughal dynasty, and there's huge disservice to what has happened over after that. I think my bigger need to learn about military history is also, if you want to be prepared and if you want our youngsters to really understand where we are heading, unless I really have a good grasp of how we have come here, what are the successes that we have, what have we endured, and what are the successes that we have received, or the failures. If I don't know the background, I'm not going to be really knowing how to conduct myself in future. So I think it's not something, I don't even want to branch it off as just military history, but it is about knowing about your own country, its strength, and what you owe to this nation. And therefore, it is not an option anymore. It is, in fact, it has to be really, really brought into the system. And I would go one step further than Mr. Singh by saying I don't think it should become a branch and an optional branch, but it must become an integral part of every student, so that one feels, responsible for this nation. We just don't have rights and liberties, but we have basic responsibility.
Well said. Well said. That was really nice. I'm going to carry this further, Padmini. You answer my next question too. Younger readers today are attracted to shorter formats and with more of pictures. In fact, graphic novels now are making a very big comeback. With Amar Chitra Katha coming up with all these war heroes, with the Mahavir Chakra awardees and the Paramveer Chakra awardees. So, but do you think that these can be incorporated to make military history more appealing to the youth of today? Graphic novels or more shorter formats.
Yeah.
Would they make a difference?
Yes, of course. I'll continue with what I said. It's not to be an option, and we have to bring it at an early age. And for me, Amar Chitrakatha, and I think all my panelists will agree that it's a very nostalgic feeling to look at Amar Chitrakatha. We grew up with Amar Chitrakatha. And sometimes people would consider it a little exaggerated or focusing on one person. But as a little child, even by your cognitive understanding, everything is larger than life. And it is extremely important to connect with stories that are a little exaggerated in valor, in courage, in compassion, because it must hit you. You should imbue and imbibe those values, which means I think it's important to do it. And it's a nice way of getting in touch with something which is larger, initially larger than life, I understand. But I think you start getting inspired when I remember when I read either how Shivaji, the Marathas, the Prithviraj Chauhan's history. I mean, that little story about what he does, about Arjuna, about Bhima, it can be anybody. But then it gives you that sense. And the biggest thing for us is our mythology, we are not still disconnected. we still celebrate, we still have festivals. So it is not like in the West where the mythology is a disconnect for them, but for us it is still connected. And when you bring Paramveer Chakra, awardees like Major
Yes.
Somnath
Yes.
Sharma, against all
Yes.
odds, with nothing at all, with a fractured hand, he actually gets there and still doesn't evacuate even after knowing fully well. I think it's absolutely, it's so engaging, and it will inspire children, and it is a must, and it's a
Even for
best
the
way
beginners.
to bring it and initiate and introduce these aspects to children so that they get some kind of interest to know further as they move in to the middle school and the high school.
Yes.
It's a great thing that they are doing, and I really love it. And I think every parent who would have grown reading Amar Chitra Kathas and Tinkle and things
Yes.
like that, and I think
We
they'll
all
be
grew up
more
with
than
that.
happy. Yes.
Coming to Colonel Vivek Sharma, Darshan Singh, sir, you did mention that I was coming to this later, that yes, he has been ex-commandant of the RIMC, and that's why I brought in this question for him, that we do know for a fact that RIMC, being the only school in India which prepares the boys for a career in the forces, does not have military history as a subject. In fact, even the NDA and the IMA, they have military geography as optional subjects, and they don't have military history. And military history is studied for the first time when they become officers and they appear for their first promotion exam. That is the time when they actually study military history. What are your views on this?
True that, ma'am. You're absolutely right. I think that is the one part which has been neglected for a while. However, having said that, I won't talk of those 128 plus subjects. But yes, the way the RIMC curriculum is there, Mr. Padmini just mentioned about Major Somnath Sharma. So the military history is adequately displayed on the four walls of RIMC, and even as part of the educational curriculum, whether it is their educational trips, they have the opportunity to go to various regimental centers. They go to the military cantonments. They do see the military history, which is related to the current armed forces, even post-independence or pre-independence history. Having said that, since you mentioned also about the NDA, IMA, and thereafter as the career in the armed forces, yes, military history needs to be incorporated at the level of the school, and RMC is no exception. So, while we have been doing all that, I would say that has only been cosmetic so far. And like I mentioned earlier, we're so grateful to Mr. Darshan that the first thought started with RMC, and the way we merged in this entire effort of his has been phenomenal. Our boys have always looked up to the military history seminar, not just looked up to it, they have participated wholeheartedly in that. And it was when I was coming for the discussion, so I was asking one of the boys about the same thing as to how he looks at these comics and all that, whether it is a jingoism or anything else. So, over the phone, what he tells me, he says, no, sir, it is not that. It is not that we need to show ourselves as the armed forces that, okay, this is what the tales of valor or something that we have done. No, it is not that. The Anybody who has been awarded a Paramveer Chakra, he has not been hero himself. It is his team which has made him the hero, and those are the lessons which go back to the rest of the younger generation. And that is the kind of esprit de corps that we instill in our boys. I think that's a great lesson for us.
So I hope the powers that be are listening, and maybe we'll have military history as a subject in the NDA and the IMA soon. Uh, Mr. Darshan Singh, sir.
Definitely.
Mr. Darshan Singh, sir, my question goes out to you. In schools across the country, I think ever since I was in school, I don't think history has changed much now that we are teaching the children. It still remains the same, which Padmini mentioned earlier, that we are stuck at ancient history, the medieval age, then the slave dynasty, the Mughal dynasty, and so on. Why do you think there's no mention of the wars fought post independence? Our history stops, and post independence, there is nothing else in our history books about the 1962 war with China, the 1971 Indo Pak War, which resulted in the liberation of Bangladesh and which displayed India's strength and military prowess to such a great extent. In fact, now, Due to the advent of technology, documentation has moved from the written content to the visual content, and news spreads quickly and widely. Hence, the Kargil War, which Padmini mentioned, and the Indochina standoff is something which the children do have some idea about. But my question is, do you think there is a need to revamp our history books?
Yes, I certainly think that we as a people need to exercise our responsibility to whatever extent we can. At Vellum Boys School, and I can speak for the other schools that have been interacting with us so well, that okay, we have to follow the CBSE, we have to follow the rules of this nation, but we do have some leeway as school administrators, as board members, as principals. We do have our way, whether it's football, cricket, hockey, we can find time. Well, we can also find time for certain other things. You can do bird watching, you can you can study insects, but you can also teach military history. You can tell, because one of the things that has rightly been mentioned by Colonel Vivek Sharma is that there is a team spirit. If you can understand how the Indian Army works or the Indian Defense Forces work, you can show the children that there is a thing called team spirit. When you want to get ahead in life, there's team spirit. And Mrs. Padmini Sambasivam rightly said that it's not only an individual story. The armed forces work as units, as regiments, as groups, and therefore I feel that one day in our military history seminar we will also talk about the life of an ordinary Jawan at the border. We don't want to only talk about the Paramveer Chakra. We will also talk about the ordinary Jawan, or for that matter, also about what Santosh Babu went through as the commandant of 22 Bihar. I mean, what was his life? What did he do? Why did his troops go forward regardless of whether they lived or not, when they knew that their colonel had met a tragic end? So what is there in the army that brings about this great team spirit, that this feeling not only of the nation but of the regiment? We have to bring that into our companies, we have to bring that into our school, we have to bring that into our own lives. And I also agree with Colonel Vivek Sharma that okay, there is a disorganization in this country on military history being taught. But it is true that when a person joins a regiment, whether he's a Jawan or an officer, he very fast gets to know about the history of his regiment, the valor of his regiment. In fact, they go through the heritage room, or there's a room they have where they see the uniforms or the medals of former officers, and they learn the history, and that brings in them a great feeling of togetherness, teamwork, and a kind of spirit in which if your friend has to die, you will die with him. I know that in the armed forces you don't leave a dead body behind, because that person is your comrade. So these things have to be learned, and we as a school are doing our bit in whatever way we can. We don't want our children to grow up only knowing about what Napoleon did. Unfortunately, our children do know a lot about Napoleon. In fact, when I was in school, we knew quite a lot about the War of the Roses, the White Rose and the Red Rose in England. But we have to know about our own country. And I agree with Padmini Sambasivam that somehow at the end of the Mughal period, there's a kind of blank. To some extent, I don't want to get controversial, but to some extent after partition, there were coup d'etats, military dictatorships coming up all the way from Morocco and Algeria up to the Philippines, going through the Arab countries, going through Pakistan, which had a military coup, Burma. All these countries had military coups. So there was a fear among our politicians as to whether that could happen here. And then they overreacted. In my opinion, they overreacted because the Indian army is far too mature, is far well trained, far well brought up. and our people don't think like that, but our politicians were afraid, and so the military was kind of subjugated. But now there's a 180-degree reversal. Today the armed forces are respected, they're getting what they want. Just 4 days ago in the newspaper, it said 50,000 warm coats or jackets have come from the United States for our soldiers who have to go through the Galwan winter. Moreover, the government of India has this entire Atmanirbhar aspect, this Atmanirbhar, this self-reliance, where Indian companies have to step in, where Indian industry has to step in, is all coming from the armed forces. So it's only when we woke up that our industry is going to get better, our factories will run better, our economy will improve. Once we realized what it means to support the armed forces, so many other things are happening in this country. This Atmanirbhar movement is totally thanks to the armed forces and what they have done for this nation. Fortunately, today we have politicians who have realized that we have to do everything to support the armed forces, including building up Indian industry. And eventually it has to go to Indian schools. It has to go to attitude. It has to go to education. It has to go to teamwork, spirit. In our last military history seminar, there were girls in the audience. When they were told that they could ask questions, their question was almost like an accusation to the general standing on the stage. And they said, "Sir, why is it only that these boys can die for the country? Why can't we also go to the border and die for our country?" That was the spirit that had. Okay. Right. So that's what I wanted to say.
Good words, beautiful words, sir. Thank you. Vivek, I'm coming to you.
Yeah.
Let's just come back to the War of 1971, which was a war fought on many fronts. Battle of Ganga Sagar,
Right.
Battle of Dograi, Battle of Basantar, to name just a few. But do you think our children today, do they need to know about these individual battles which were fought across many fronts? It's not just the war, the individual battles. Do they need to know about these battles and about the heroes who won these wars and these individual battles?
Absolutely, ma'am. There is no doubt about that, because whenever we are talking about the military history, we are only talking about few awardees, and those awards come from a particular battle. So, like we talk about Major Somnath Sharma. It was 27th October, just a few days ago. But we are only talking about a particular battle. While there have been so many people who would have lived the same tales, similar stories at a different war front, but they would be lost somewhere in the history. So there is no recorded history as far as the military history is concerned for the larger public. Of course, it is there in the military domain, but it, like Mr. Darshan mentioned right in the beginning, it is not there in the public domain. And if at all there is any form of history which is available, it is available from, I would say, memoirs of people. There are those anecdotal aspects which come into them, but there is no official recorded history, or I would say research history, which is being made available for anybody to make their own considered decision or knowledge about various wars. So it is very essential for all of us, in fact for everybody, to have studied various battles, because each battle is a war in itself.
True, exactly. Padmini, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I completely agree, because, like he said, each of these points that people think a war is maybe most probably, civilians like me who's neither married to an army officer, or we don't have that at all, that concept, and we can only get it when people write authentic material. So, and we are aware of it. It's not like war is just in a particular location. It is they are guarding it 24/7, and there are so many of these small little battles which we may not be aware of, but they are doing it on a daily basis. But unless I'm exposed to at least 6 to 8 of them, on and off on the major war fronts that we have actually made a decisive victory, I don't think children will be able to. In fact, this is one question that I've seen when I think one of the lieutenant generals was speaking in a TED talk. He asked, "Can how many of?" And it was in a college, and I am kind of a space where the brightest of the brightest are sitting, and he said, "Can any one of you locate CHN for me?" We do not know, and we just, it's so sad that we do not know the highest point that we are supposed to be guarding. I can't locate it in the map. Most children will not be able to, and they do not know the extraordinary conditions in which these people live, with minus 55 degrees sometimes, and with avalanche wind velocity at 60 kilometers per hour, whatever. But the point I'm making is, unless these are recorded and shared with the civilians at a very young age, which is the student body, I don't think we will be able to appreciate what they do, because what we don't see, we just take it for granted. It is not one Divas I can be happy about, one Vijay Divas or one. It's so sad that we just take so many things for granted. If we are able to sleep today, it's because of them, and we better be grateful for it. At least understand what they go through. So that's where, and it will not come if we don't bring it at a very early age. You see, it's like building character in peace, but courage in wartime. It's like a hidden curriculum that will have to grow with us all through our years. Otherwise, you can't suddenly one day feel for something or somebody. It has to be inbuilt in us, and that will come only with constant exposure to all the wonderful things that people do.
Sorry for interrupting you. My question now is, Padmini, to you. It's an extension of what you're speaking. So I'll just give you my question, and you can just give me the study of one's country's military history encourages a student. Apart from what you were saying, it also encourages a student to develop strategic orientation, problem solving, logical reasoning, and analytical thinking, which will hold them in good stead in the years to come, irrespective of what career they choose later on. So, would you like to give us some situational examples? And Sir Darshan Singh, sir, I'd like you also to give your views on this, please, because we did discuss that military history. I mean, the ethos and the camaraderie that they share, but also problem solving and analytical thinking, I thought was a very important factor also, which we could discuss today.
Yeah.
So let Padmini ji start.
No, however, yeah. I would say, I mean, I'll just finish in 2 minutes, because when you understand, let's say 1971 war, this, at least now we have the pleasure of listening to, say, Lieutenant General Jacob or even Field Marshal Maneksha's talk. We do, you kind of understand how, first thing that a person understands is to be able to be objective about where they want to head first, and also understand their own strength and weakness. His conversation with our then PM, Srimati Indira Gandhi, about how open and explicit he was about how he needed time, and that the army and the services will have to be given a little bit of freedom to exercise, to prepare. So if you look at the way they had gone about it, it was very meticulous. The choice of the time that they took, something like October, November, so that the Chinese cannot possibly, kind of come through those passes. They chose the time. They did not want the monsoon time. Which, with this strategy, you have to understand your locations, your seasons, and also give yourself some time to prepare and train. So, which means you have a plan and action, and you cannot do it independently, because you had on all three sides, east and west of Pakistan, and you have to protect yourself. Their strategy was fantastic, with the naval officers moving towards Karachi, while on this side, with the Mukti Bagh. And the thing is, how do you collaborate not just within? If you want to do something further, you will also have to collaborate with outside of your nation, also with certain people. That is something, unless we expand on all this and say, if your objective is to get somewhere, planning is important, knowing your strength and weakness is important, preparing for it is also equally important, because unless you're prepared, I don't think you can communicate something to somebody better. So at the end of the day, if we have won wars, it is not just because of, of course, courage, there is no doubt, because most often, if you listen to the Lieutenant General speak, they will say, I had only 3,000 people or so, but they had so many. So numbers do not matter. It is about how much you have prepared yourself, and how it is also partly psychological. as to how you can actually move your game. So I think it's extremely important for the kids to know the details, so that in any career that you are, whatever may be your objective, you will have to plan, you will have to train, you will have to communicate clearly and have a timeline on which you can move. Unless you, and this is not just strategy and tactics, is not just in the defense, it's in any space. And most importantly, if we do not collaborate with people, if we want recognition just for the self, I mean, service before the self is what they say, and that is not just for the army or the defense forces. It has to be for every citizen in this space. So I think you'll have to get this thought in. Unfortunately, in our history, we are talking about timelines. We are not looking at the broader objective of learning history, which is to actually not make the similar mistakes that we have done prior. It is to learn from your history, because people, and of course, the history, like he said very rightly, it is the victorious who write history. It's not authentic enough. So, and parts of history, let's say the South, is completely obliterated. There's no history of the South at all, and that's very sad. So I think we have to rewrite history, bring in current history, if we want our children to grow into fine citizens.
Mr. Darshan Singh, sir, would you like to elaborate on this? And also then, what is your take on compulsory conscription as an extension of this?
Yeah, first of all, I agree entirely with what the co-panelists are saying, and I think I'm quite amazed by Padmini ji's knowledge of the Bangladesh operation, because she's analyzed it as well as any military general would have planned it, talking about the Chinese and the Mukti Bahini and the climate and the territory and the Navy attacking Karachi, which is all true. I think even the Indian Air Force had been alerted at that time for Karachi. But very true. I mean, it's wonderful that if she knows, then the girls in Vellum girls also know, the young girls also know. And so I think this is exactly what we're trying to achieve. The whole purpose of this exercise of military history was to bring about an awareness. The next generation should know. And if that is indeed happening, it's fantastic. But one thing that has come out of the recent few minutes of this conversation is that we have to go through life later on. The children have to go through life, whether they join the armed forces or whatever they do. But as has been said, you have to plan in life also to get through and succeed in life, to write a book, to run a company, to win a contract, to build a product, to succeed in designing a new product. All these things are important, the planning, and the army is a wonderful way of learning how you plan. And we in the commercial world know that you have to look at the past manufacturing figures or the past figures of the economic index to know how to face the future. But in the armed forces, in particular, they learn certain battles and strategies, because that tells them what to do in future. The point that we have to remember here, and which we have to also spread awareness among children, is that the field dynamics is changing. There was a time when wars were won with people, but then later on with horses. Horses became a great factor in conquest. And then after that, it became mechanized forces, and the artillery helped the infantry, because without the infantry, you can't do anything. That's the queen of battle. But now today, you are actually striking from 800 kilometers away. You don't see the enemy. So if you use missiles, if you use electromagnetic waves, if you use satellites, if you use other ways of attacking the other side, like cyber warfare, you actually disengage the banking system or the electricity system in a nation. So there's so much more to the armed forces now. And here also, I would say, thank God. It's horrible when the Chinese attack us, but when history will show that this attack of the Chinese made India wake up, and we now have fantastic effort. And I must. Padmini said that we don't know what's happening in South India. I can tell you the entire space program is coming from South India. They understand mathematics, so the South Indians are contributing in a phenomenal way with their brain power. We have missiles, we have rockets, we have so many things coming out, anti-tank missiles, we have all kinds of things. There's a radiation thing also now, so RADRAM or something it's called, and now with all that, it's changing the dynamics. So I think this is also something which has to be taught to the students. Tell them, because when our lives are over, it'll be with knowledge of. You're saying something, Ratna?
We have to wrap up. I just have one question. I wanted to talk about women power, if I may call it that. Women are on a roll these days, what with them being inducted to fly the Rafale and also inducted into the Navy warships. Padmini, I wanted to know exactly, keep it very short, what is your take on compulsory conscription? This was one of my important questions. We haven't been able to cover it. Compulsory conscription and then compulsory conscription for girls. Keep it short.
Okay. I think conscription, it's true in cases like Israel and others where the population is really, really low. And there are a lot of people who do not say compulsory conscription is one of the best. But I think I must appreciate that from the 1992s to 2020, women have been accepted in the forces way better. First, it was Short Service Commission. Now it's way better for us. Of course, in the Air Force and in the Navy, we have got spaces. And we've even been in war zones like Gunjan Saxena and others. But all I'm trying to say is there is no point pushing women into the combat zone without also culturally and psychologically getting used to the fact that we have to be accepted just like in any other field. Instead of pushing ourselves, it must be organic, it must be natural, it must not harm the current forces. But conscription, as I say, because we are a 1.3 billion population, with every 6 individuals, 1 is an Indian. I do not think conscription in that concept is important. But I think right after class 12, maybe 6 to 8 months or a year, we must at least be in some form associated so that we will be, serve the nation in some field, like an auxiliary field also. But then it's important to be part of that, because you can't get suddenly disciplined and be part of something if you don't even know what is to be done. So I think an exposure to our responsibility for a year or 6 to 8 months will be brilliant right after class 12, because that's when you're mature enough to handle yourself. And it's important that you experience it so that you can actually even, appreciate what is offered and also rise to the challenge when need comes.
Okay, I think that was beautifully put. And so that we all agree, I think it's been really a very lively and interactive discussion. And I think we've all come to the conclusion that teaching our children about the wars that our brave hearts fought and the medals that they won, the ethos, the camaraderie, the integrity, and the esprit de corps that is shared among the officers and their men. That's what Sir Darshan Singh also said. It's something that needs to be highlighted, emulated, and admired. Padmini, Colonel Vivek Sharma, Mr. Darshan Singh, sir, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to all our viewers who've been watching us. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's been wonderful with all of
Wonderful.
Thank you for being a
Hope
good
to see you all
compare.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.